Hello and welcome to another special episode of the Third Age Babylon 5 podcast. Once again, we are diving into, I guess, our Earth Alliance Geneva University courses curriculum, which is becoming kind of a thing. And instead of just Earth Alliance history, today we are taking a course which I have boldly called astropolitics, so kind of, interstellar, looking at astronomy and the political landscape of the galaxy. It is course 101, so we are just going to cover the very basics today. But yeah, I hope you're excited to take a look with me at a bunch of different sources across various different books, just to, get a bit more of a bearing before we start season 3, which is also going to have a lot more to do with big galactic events happening.
Yes.
Uh,
I'm excited.
I hope so. And personally, I can tell you one of the pieces that I'm most excited of or about is some of the illustrations that I found, because I've been scouring a few different rule books today, and some of the very oldest rule books have these beautiful mixtures of screenshots and hand-painted scenes and stuff, such as our very highly educated Nan right there. Who is going to present to us today's topic. So what are we going to take a look at today? The Galaxy of Babylon 5. It's just going to be a little bit, what impression have we gotten there? The League of Non-Aligned Worlds, which has been playing a bigger role both in Earth Alliance history and in the actual show. And kind of as an example of what such a League race might look like, we are going to take a closer look at the Drazi, also because they are one of the more influential and better featured of these species in the show. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. I do start feeling like this, grammatics 101 professor trying to hype up his students for this, but don't worry. The last thing I will sort of solo present to you before we get to actual talking is the sources that we're going to take today. It's a bunch of them, much more. We are not relying on a single fact book today, although I did bring this one, the fact book for Non-Aligned Worlds, which is part of the same Moongoose Publishing role-playing game that our Earth Alliance history is based on. But there's also a whole lot of different stuff here, and we should preface all of this with, once again, the disclaimer: none of what we're talking about is strictly canon. It's all just things that people wrote based on the show when the show was airing and shortly after, and us sort of collecting these ideas and deciding for our own which ones of these two sound very good, which ones of these two sound kind of ridiculous. And it's going to be part of the fun here.
You've been quite busy so far.
Right? And just kind of as a reminder, Meike, you will be familiar with this, but the structure is going to be very similar to what we've done with Earth Alliance history so far. We are asking ourselves basically 4 questions. What have we actually seen in the show? And more importantly, I guess, what do we remember seeing in the show? Then based on that, sort of, what do we imagine? And finally, what is written in all of these different sources and what do we think about that?
Let's roll.
Okay. In that case, we start in the very big picture with the question, what have we seen of the Galaxy of Babylon 5? And this is one that I'm very curious about, because just sort of based on the show that you've seen so far, what is your impression? Like, what does the Galaxy of Babylon 5 actually look like? Feel free to give your answer to this just raw. I've also brought for you some examples of other sci-fi settings that might spark some inspiration if you have no idea where to start.
Yeah, I'm mentally, I would say, I'm somewhere with Doctor Who trying to describe what time is like.
Mm-hmm.
This timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly, whatever. Because there is, to me, no real structure or no clear idea how this whole thing might look like in a structural way, because so far we've seen most of the galaxy in perspective of B5, which is quite limited, and of course the interactions we see within B5, within these different races, species, it's chaotic most of the times. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there is obviously the possibility to check on at least a certain amount of information about the planets where the species are living, what they're eating, the most necessary biological functions. So, like, can they eat this or is it poisonous to them? But yeah, the overall idea of where is everyone living, how are they connected with each other, is mostly in the dark. And at times where we see a bit of this, it's yeah, either it's in the direction of we fight and kill each other, or this messy idea of um two groups of people that have no idea how to interact with each other.
I think that's a very good of describing the general situation also on Babylon 5 itself. A bunch of people have come together with this bright idea of let's live together and this is going to help us be peaceful with one another, but they don't really have a plan beyond that. And I think we've seen a little bit of this so far. But no, this is I think very similar to my impression that I had round about like starting the third season of Babylon 5 of yeah, all of this is really cool. I still have no idea what's actually going on. I don't really get the big picture. I mean, we've seen what like three different homeworlds so far. We kind of see like, TV glimpses of Earth. We've seen the non-homeworld get bombarded. I think the biggest thing that we've seen is a little bit of the Centauri homeworld, right? Like they have a palace there. And that's about it. But also like where in relation that is to anywhere, very hard to tell. Um, Before we start sort of going into, I can't even say revealing what the Babylon 5 universe looks like because, I mean, this is all going to be speculation. Um, Maybe just because I know you have some experience with other science fiction works, is this something that generally you think about at all, or where you have some preferences, or is this more something that's kind of that's the type of world building that you can take or leave, but it doesn't really do anything for you?
Mm, it's a bit complicated. I would say most series or games in the science fiction genre are quite similar. You do not have. I have to think like if you have maybe a fantasy book where you have this nice little map drawings of yeah, and this is where this whole story is going to happen, and this is this region, and this is this little tiny what is important. It has this and this name. Um, we don't have anything like this, or at least the things I watched and read are not remotely in this direction. Um, and usually it feels like yeah, it doesn't matter because it's the universe, it's big, and um, therefore you can't really explaining where everyone is living and in relation to others is far too complicated. Um, the lazy answer would be they never bother to think about this and to take this excuse like it's too big. Um, I'm not sure. Yeah,
I,
I have anything relatable.
I like that you bring up fantasy maps because I wonder if this is a problem or extra challenge that science fiction kind of has. If you draw like, if you give me the map of Middle Earth, it's going to have some features that are actually relevant to the story, right? Like if there's a mountain range,
Mm.
characters will have to go around that. If there's a swamp region, I probably suspect orcs there rather than some high elves living there because I know they like trees and it's basic stuff like that. If I give you a star map in a science fiction setting, well, okay, you know where the planets are, but the planets still can be anything, and they aren't really usually big geographic features that people have to go around. I guess it's harder to come up with a map that just by looking at it tells you a lot about what's going to be going on in this world. Would be my guess. Um, I
Yeah, though I like this idea of having a map. What could be the closest to this would be the Mass Effect games,
hmm,
especially the third one where you are yeah, going through space to different areas and are exploring not just planets but also asteroids and everything. Um, of course, when you see this, you do not know what relevance they have, but just the idea of having sort of a map and an image where you can that you can have in the back of your mind where you can say, oh yeah, okay, I see now where everything comes together.
hmm.
I think it's interesting to have something like that and gives the world created in any kind of story just more depth and yeah, feels more relatable and is easier to imagine.
Well, it's crazy that you would mention Mass Effect here. It's also like I had something in that direction prepared. No, I totally agree with you that maps are something I personally love a lot, especially in sci-fi if they're done like creatively and more just than just a few dots on a map. So I brought some examples here before we go to some actual Babylon 5 one. The first example that I bring here is, I guess, sort of the immediate thing you would jump to if you're watching Babylon 5 in the 90s and you see, oh, there's a big sci-fi setting that tries to say something about politics. So the closest equivalent, I guess, that people would be looking at watching Babylon 5 in the 90s would be something like Star Trek, which has a boatload of really cool maps being made for it. That usually look like this, and the resolution is not going to be good enough for you to tell very much. I can very broadly tell you the blue area is the Human Federation and all their like friendly species. Red is the scary Klingons. Green is the Romulans. And I guess you kind of get to see a little bit sort of what are the big players and how are they relating. Like if Babylon 5 tells me in Gropos, oh, we are trying to go to this and that planet because it's strategically positioned on a map like this, you can kind of tell. I guess it's a political map of the universe. But also it does suffer a little bit from this problem that there's a lot of little dots and little names that don't really, mean all that much on their own.
Yeah, it's a bit like oversaturation. I do get the idea of, oh, I want to have a complete map of everything. But if you're scrolling out to a scale like this of a map, you just have to let them fade out. Otherwise, the whole map is a bit nonsensical.
I mean, we have to also be fair. Like every map has its own purposes, and like with a map like this, like you say, the fun isn't looking at the whole thing zoomed out. It's going in the detail and actually like tracing. Where does the Enterprise go next, and trying to follow that. But so I mean, this is obviously not necessarily what we're looking at. I guess the polar opposite to that would be the map that you already mentioned from Mass Effect 3, which shows you the entire galaxy, but very much fades out and just kind of tells you where everything is. What I like about Mass Effect, and we mentioned this before, Mass Effect takes a lot of inspiration from Babylon 5, and one of these inspirations that they're kind of fleshing out a lot more here is that you travel between systems via gates, and these gates in this case are Mass Effect relays, but whether it's a Mass Effect relay or it leads you into hyperspace, there is this idea that you're traveling in a normal way through the galaxy. So systems that are very closely linked in the story can be like all way apart. The galaxy in Mass Effect has systems all over the galaxy, but I guess in total the civilizations in Mass Effect have like 100 systems that they're actively using that are just really, really far apart. And that's like one of these fun ideas for Babylon 5 as well. Like there's nothing saying that in Babylon 5 everything is very closely packed together necessarily.
for some reason, I was thinking about the sci-fi game Ixion. I can't really remember how exactly the maps were made. I think, though, that we have their similar system, like with here Mass Effect. You're just jumping from one area to another,
Mm.
which is also a nice way of showing the world.
It's also like fun because it takes advantage of being this weird sci-fi setting, so it can be a lot different than sort of the more classic fantasy-esque map that shows you one area that is sort of connected with tissue. Uh, Talking about creative ways of doing this, one fun one that I found, which is, I mean, all of these are to some extent fan-made, except for the Babylon 5 one that's straight from the game. A map of the Stargate universe using a typical underground tube map. That it's kind of how this functions. Like this is a universe where the gateways are more important than traveling around by spaceships. So this is kind of what I find it just really charming. Um, yeah. Uh,
I really like this one. This
I
this
mean,
looks cool.
it could work for Babylon 5 as well, right? Like if you imagine every single gateway is just a station and the hyperspace is sort of your underground system where you travel along little buoys. Somebody could get on this and make a Babylon 5 map like that. And I say this because there are some maps of the Babylon 5 universe out there, but like all of the extended lore of Babylon 5, they are notoriously contradictory and non-canon. And not all of them are particularly pretty. I mean, that's that's a lot of personal preference there as well. But I personally am not the biggest fan of all their designs. But I think it's like we've delayed this long enough. Let's take a look actually at a proper map of the Babylon 5 universe, and this is the one. Now the map does specify it's 2257, so that's like just before the events of the show start, which makes sense because over the course of season 2 alone, the map has changed kind of dramatically because the Gnaw are no longer there. But yeah, I guess like let's take this apart step by step. First impression for me, at least seeing this the first time, was that's not particularly big. I mean, that's star systems, but I think of something like Star Trek where a quadrant of the galaxy is being mapped out. This is much smaller. It's a quaint little neighborhood in terms of astronomy.
I can't see that well. Are those little dots, are those planets, or are these like this is like the Milky Way. This is
Yeah, these are like
another.
every dot that you can see there is one star. So there aren't individual planets marked here. You can imagine like every one of these little dots contains like, a handful of colonies like that.
Okay.
And
Yeah, well, at least it gets a bit bigger if you know this. But yeah, it does still feel. And on the other hand, I'm not sure.
it's an interesting balance, right? Because it isn't like it's a lot of star systems on one
Yeah.
but then breaking it down, like the really major powers you see at the upper right corner there, this like purple area, this is the entirety of the Centauri Republic. And that's not, around about a dozen systems or so. Earth Alliance, similarly spaced. The non-regime, not even half the size of that right on top there. And then when you go to the actual League worlds that we are going to talk about, like this is this absolute little mess on the left-hand side there where there's always like one or two stars that are
Yeah.
differently, a lot of unclaimed one in between. So you get the sense like, oh wow, an interstellar civilization in the Babylon 5 universe is going to have like maybe 2 to 3 different star systems, and that's kind of it. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, they're just going to be sitting there and kind of developing that. And there's not that much expansion going on, which I find interesting.
What I really like about this map is that you see a bit of the power system there. And on the other hand, you have surprises. Like in the far right, you have the Wallon Empire. Is that right?
Yes.
With like 3 star systems.
I mean,
I mean, okay, they are obviously so far with the information we had, no not an expanding species. They prefer to keep to themselves. Therefore, it in a way it does make sense to not stretch your borders too far. On the other hand, they have been around for quite some time, and they still just decided to keep in this small little area of the universe.
I mean, I guess this is also where, the maps always invite speculating about the lore, and this is where we can start speculating. Is this a case, going back to fantasy maps, is this a case of the high elves, this like very advanced, old, ancient, powerful civilization that now sits around in this little gray haven by Linden and doesn't do anything anymore because they don't have a need to expand? They're also very protective. Like we know about the Warlords, you can't really enter their space because they're patrolling it a lot, so it might make sense to have it small and tight. Or on the other hand, the other alternative is this is a situation like Rune. We have like 3 settlements that we know about, and then an endless expanse of their territory that is just off the map and not featured because nobody knows about it, which also would make sense for the Vorlon. But I mean, I'm inclined to agree with your initial sort of impression that the Vorlon just kind of have this little pocket of space that they don't let anybody look into, and they're insanely powerful, but don't really control a lot of space.
Which also means maybe, of course, that they don't need that much of space. I mean, the Centauri, they have so many star systems. Well, it's they are a bit more like the Roman Empire. They are getting new people in. It's just they don't have to. They're not a homogeneous group.
Yeah.
They have different species living in their part of the universe. Just that, it's like stamped. It's ours now, and the Warlords is so far, I would guess, a bit more of a closed off species. I mean, we know they have like deep frozen humans if they need them, or other species, I'm pretty sure. But also then the question of aging and reproduction. Like, can they? Yeah, are they like elves, like high elves? Do they age? Are they ageless? Is age something that can't kill them, or are they just getting really, really old? Can they easily reproduce and therefore grow their species? I would assume the Centauri are a species that, maybe a bit like rabbits.
I mean, they do have very many different wives, and I mean, if they get along better than Londo does with his wives, I can imagine pretty big families coming from that.
Yeah, therefore, also they might need the space compared to others. But these are all aspects you have to consider when you watch a map like this.
I mean, perhaps Babylon 5. Obviously, it's just us interpreting this, and this is not even a proper Babylon 5 map. But looking at this, my first inclination would be, oh, good, this is a science fiction universe that actually gets scale maybe a little bit better than other shows of the time would, because I think especially in older sci-fi days, there's quite often this idea of humanity has to expand and like make colonies on hundreds of solar systems now because we've used up all the resources on Earth or something like that. And I think in more recent years, megastructures have become much more popular and such. Like, we're getting a better sense of the fact that one solar system is an insane amount of resources. Your civilization can go on for millions of years and not really tap into this in any meaningful way. Like, if you want to house a population of quadrillions of people, okay, you just start building a Dyson sphere, and that's fine then. But it's still going to be easier than trying to manage interstellar journeys, because it's just that far apart. And disassemble a few planets, you're gonna have resources for days. So this idea that all of these different species don't really have a huge incentive to expand is kind of interesting. I look at somebody like the Vorlons and think, well, if they have this good resources, why would they go out and look for other Earth-like planets? They can terraform anything they want. They don't need to go looking for naturally occurring ones. And like you mentioned, on the other side, you have somebody like the Centauri. And if I were part of a civilization where every clan tries to backstab each other all the time, I would have a lot of incentive to go out, on the frontier and try to find another little species that I can subjugate. Like, the reason to expand is because there's other species that you want to control. Okay, then it makes sense to try and have this massive empire. And I mean, we were looking at Earth Alliance history. We kind of know that this is what happened to Earth, even to some degree. There is this random house of the Centauri that just shows up because they can easier establish themselves as rulers here than stay in the Republic, where they're probably a small player. I think this sort of map also matches the depictions of Earth Alliance colonies that we have. We haven't seen much of those, but most of the Earth colonies, like even Mars, are relatively tiny. Like, a few million people, a bunch of domes in like cut off habitats and stuff. But it's not like Earth Alliance is really, properly industrializing a bunch of different planets at the same time right here. So even this little sliver in the center there that Earth Alliance gets, it's probably like a massively inflated space, and a lot of other species wouldn't even bother trying to hold this much territory, because it's going to lead to a lot of tension with your neighbors, and you gain relatively little from it. So it's just an interesting dynamic right there.
I would agree.
The final thing I would say about this map is also, I like there's a lot of unclaimed territories in the middle there. Like, anytime you can take a planet, there's the question, okay, but how many other people is this going to be bordering? Do I want a perpetual border conflict with the Nan for the next 200 years? Or do I just say, well, okay, let's just not touch this planet for a while? Like, this is how places like Epsilon 3, where Babylon 5 is located, come about. This idea that you initially leave some buffer zones in between, like the Centauri love talking about.
Yeah.
But okay, having seen this map, I think we do get a little bit of this idea also what the situation is looking like why Earth Alliance might be bothered by the Centauri Republic taking over the Nan regime, because they suddenly get very, very big. And we see also how from this area, the Nan could start invading a whole bunch of smaller places and try to sort of envelop Earth Alliance, which is why we're probably bothered about that. That all makes sense to me. We also have like a pretty decent idea of the scale of the entire setting. So maybe on this basis, let's move and take a look at one of the, let's say, factions inhabiting this space. We've obviously talked a lot about the Earth Alliance so far. In the show, we get heavily featured the Minbari, the Nan, the Centauri, and even the Vorlon. Let's talk about the little guys for a little bit. And with that, of course, we mean the League of Non-Aligned Worlds. I don't know why the most multi-species picture I could find in the Codex was in the casino, but I guess gambling is what unites us all. But, just once again, let's start with our own impressions. And you're the newbie, so your impressions are worth a post. The League of Non-Aligned Worlds, all the little guys that are around. Here's like 4 questions on these, and let's start with the first one. How many would you say are there? Like, how vast is this area? Are we talking about like hundreds of different species, like in the Star Trek galaxy, or smaller, bigger? What are you feeling?
Of course, what we know is really, really limited. And even when they were coming together for council meetings and stuff like that.
Hmm.
There weren't that many participants, which not necessarily means that all were present. Not every species part of the non-aligned world has an ambassador on B5. Therefore, the possibility is endless. What we've seen on the map, I would say a few dozen.
Okay. Based on the show, I think what struck me, I guess in comparison to something like Star Trek or Star Wars, just to name the most obvious examples of galaxy-spanning settings, I think in Star Trek, I'm completely used to this idea that if I fly in a straight line, every other star system I'm gonna encounter a never seen before, a wholly different species. Babylon 5 kind of has made this point that you get a few familiar faces. Like, even if we don't put names to them, I think we've all seen, the Drazi we've seen a few times now. When the Tauri are randomly attacking some of the neighbors, the guys with the insectoid faces showed up multiple times. We've had 2 instances of the crop cycle aliens popping up. If we include some of their UFOs showing up. So there is sort of this idea it's a big community out there, but I would also have suspected something along the lines what you're saying, a few dozen where it's still a village, a galactic village, I would call. If you spend enough time here, you're probably gonna get to know everybody, if not by name, then at least sort of, knowing their face more or less. I mean, and now that you've seen at the map, how powerful would we expect the League to be? Maybe, how powerful do we expect an individual species of the League to be? Obviously, this can vary a lot, but also, the League as a whole. How are we feeling about that?
The League as a whole, I think they could manage a lot. I mean, I could imagine if they were all really working together, I think they could hold their cup of tea against Centauri. The problem is they don't. It's like this, okay, we call us this League, but it's still at the point of it's more of an idea than actual working system. And in everyone on themselves in this League, I would say there are a lot of differences. Of course, there are the more powerful, good established, strongly resourced species, and others that are not that well off. And of course, something like technical development and all these things will differentiate strongly. I mean, we already said this a few times, that it feels a bit like, the space version of the European Union. Can't talk anymore. And it feels like the same. If everyone is on board, there's a lot of good and, of course, also bad things that can be done and achieved, but you have to get there, and I don't think they are there yet because they do not have this idea or vision of a base where everyone can agree on. It's more like okay, there are a lot of threats, so maybe we can go together and therefore form something that can protect us from the Centauri.
I mean, I really love the name. If we put it together completely, like the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, forming a league and putting in the name that everybody in there is not aligned with anything, sort of gives you the complete contradiction of this entire faction. And I think I'm largely on board with you right there. We've compared it to the European Union, also to the UN to some degree, or at least the Babylon 5 Council, where there is maybe this idea of protecting themselves, but then again, we've already seen with the onset of the Dilgar War, historically, this hasn't worked terribly well. And there's probably been on quite a few occasions questions like, what does the League actually do? Like, what does it benefit us at all? Connected to this and connected to sort of the same thoughts that you were just saying, one question that popped up for me was how old the League actually is, because it was difficult to find a clear answer on this. Most accounts of the Drazi War portrayed in a way that the League is already sort of a thing, or at least the different species of the League have some level of cooperation going on. But at the same time, before Babylon 5 itself, there never seems to have been any sort of concrete body of the League, a meeting place for them or such. So I really wonder what the structure of the League was before Babylon 5, because it seems to have existed in some way, but was this just kind of a firm handshake that people agreed on, or was there some sort of structure? And I was curious, like, what your impression on this is. Does this feel like it has existed like this for a long time? Does this seem like a much more recent idea that they are trying to work together? What's sort of the canon that you would imagine there?
I could imagine that even the name you already said it's quite pessimistic. So we're together, but not really. So I could imagine that this all started, just as a reference to that they were this whole this freckled place in universe where there are a lot of tiny groups that are not a threat, that are not much, and that the stronger ones were like, oh yeah, this bunch, this group, this league of non-aligned worlds. I could totally imagine that, and that at some point though this group said, okay, yeah, we take this name on and show you. At least that is something I would totally like to see. Because this
idea.
pessimistic naming, I'm not sure. Of course, there could be this a few pessimistic species that just generally have this outlook on everything in the future and named it therefore. But if you would take this route, it's not that it's a pessimistic idea that created this, but just kind of the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a bit of a fuck you attitude against the big players. Therefore, I kind of like this idea.
I think this is one of these instances where this is absolutely not canon. I'm pretty certain in canon we don't know, but it fits the spirit of Babylon 5 really well. This idea that the League was something that was imposed onto them by somebody more powerful, and they just kind of ran with it eventually and made it their own. I like this idea a lot. I think this is what we should go with. Which I guess also would start answering the final question here, like, how does the League function? Because the League of Non-Aligned Worlds and the Babylon 5 Council are two separate things, but the Babylon 5 Council is sort of the only time we see the League in any sort of capacity represented as one. So, my mind goes to this question, okay, before Babylon 5, after Babylon 5, or when Babylon 5 is not actually running the show, how does the League do anything? How does it function?
I mean, the first impression would be to say they don't.
Mm-hmm.
This feels a bit arrogant to do, because this is again this idea of, oh yeah, the humans, they're saving everyone. I hope that there was some sort of at least trying to achieve things and to get together, maybe a few people traveling from place to place and trying to get in a few negotiations so that benefit one or another. Though I can't really imagine another way. Maybe they had some like agreed on meeting times and places like like a summit where we're going to meet on this and this date, and then rotating the places. But there's just not enough information to really get to a conclusion, and therefore I don't want to speculate too much because I wouldn't be satisfied with that.
I mean, the one piece of information that I would go with is we know that humanity never really became part of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds. Like in the Earth Alliance history that we've looked at so far, Earth plunges itself into World War III, somehow survives, goes into space, and pretty much immediately starts having dealings with the Centauri and with the Narn, like with the big players on the galactic stage, and always presents itself sort of as one of the larger powers that helps out the League in the Dilgar War, but never really is a part of that. So my initial impression would be Earth also looked at the League, asked itself, how does this function? It came to the same conclusion. It doesn't, and we don't want to be part of it. Which reminds me a little bit, we made this comparison today already, looking at Mass Effect. I think it does a similar thing where there is this entire structure of the Council of Important Species and a bunch of, lesser species that are trying to get on the Council. And I think like one of the very first things you learn when you go to the Citadel and sit in this Presidium, the center of galactic governance, is a bunch of other species bickering that humanity essentially skipped the line and tries to go straight to the Council instead of, dealing with them. That feels very in tune to sort of what the situation on Babylon 5 is also.
I can totally understand this kind of doing though, because if you're not part of the group that decides how everything has to be done, your needs aren't met, and that sucks.
It does. I mean, seems to be also the canon for all of the members of the League, that it kind of sucks being in there, and they are just sort of more. This is why I like the idea that it's kind of imposed from the outside. It's not that they decided to be in this group. It's just kind of they got shunted into this and now make the best of it. Well, let's take a look at some of the answers that are sort of collectively what most is sort of the common denominator between all the different sources that we have. There's different numbers cited around the time that the show takes place, around 14 member species of the League, but it varies a lot. In the past, there were sometimes less, sometimes more. It depends, like very small species like the Believer species counted into them or not, but it hovers right round about like a dozen, 2 dozen at most.
Or maybe when a species get extinct, like the markup, or some of the
into account.
or some of them are getting part of another player on the stage, like being consumed by like the Centauri.
It's a not a fixed number across all of history. It tends to wax and wane quite a bit. What is being said in multiple sources is sort of this rule of thumb: if they all got their stuff together and were actually functioning as one unit, like you mentioned, they could probably play with the big boys as one of the big powers. Whether or not they would be able to take on the Centauri is debatable, but at least it would be somewhat of a fair fight, is sort of the general consensus there. Although, of course, we have to see this very, very much in relative terms. Like, on paper, all of the league would be strong enough to withstand even, Earth Alliance trying to take them down. But then again, we've seen the Dilgar completely run amok across the league just by doing batshit crazy tactics and doing a bunch of war crimes. So it's not like this is a hard number necessarily. We already talked a little bit about the fact that it's not super specified how old the League of Non-Aligned Worlds is, or at least the concept. It probably came about sometime during the decline of the Centauri Republic, when a lot of them were kind of freed. But, then there is kind of this question, like how official of a thing this even is. The one quote that I found, or a few quotes that I found, that sort of try to describe the functioning of the league in general, I mean, they all agree it's not functioning very well. It's not really getting a lot of things successfully done. What it does highlight, though, is that equality and procedure are very important to the league. Like, the league doesn't get much done, but it always agrees on the fact that every species should be represented as an equal share of the whole, which is different, for example, from how the Earth Alliance functions. And procedure, bureaucratic procedure, is very important to them. Like, they're never going to agree on anything, but they will hold a meeting about it, and they will send an ambassador to be at that meeting and then just scream at each other. But, like, despite everything, they are being held together by this idea that there should be some sort of structure. Like, they at least declare war before you go running and doing stuff. So there is some level of, I guess, lawfulness to the chaos that they usually inhabit. I will go one step further, and here's just a few indicative quotes. The first here being, the league has been compared to a raging maelstrom of ideology, with the league as the dubious safe haven at its heart. I kind of like that as a general descriptor of, and I mean, it just illustrates this point. Like, every member species has vastly different cultures, and they don't naturally have any sort of common ground, and it usually is a lot of chaos because of that.
Which is this contrast, at least feels like, to this idea of places or groups being kind of a melting pot where everything grows together.
Yeah, this seems to be kind of this idea, or what this quote is also, I guess, hinting at, that initially a lot of the league species are just kind of considered to be mutually exclusive or like incompatible, where they have just so many feuds that you can't really sit them down and try to argue for sort of a peaceful solution, which I guess, within one species would be easier to do because there's at least some overlap there, and with them they're just too different. The second quote I've put here is, the full equality is the only method by which all of the races could agree to function. And this I found kind of interesting because it puts this idea, we've looked at the map, some of these species are older or younger, more advanced, bigger or smaller than others, but they insist on the idea and that is the one thing that the league sort of does always, is every species gets one vote. Even as part of the Babylon 5 Council, within the league, every species, every representative gets one vote, and that decides what the entirety of the league is going to do. I find that interesting because, specifically if we talk about the Earth Alliance, for example, that is not how the Earth Alliance functions. Certain nations in the Earth Alliance, certain colonies in the Earth Alliance get more of a say based on how military powerful they are, how industrially they are powerful, how much population they represent. So there's a more complex system there. And the League sort of does away with all of this and says, no, one species equals one vote, done. And they never get beyond that, because trying to argue would just invite, conflict, because then species would have to figure out how to gauge themselves against each other.
Maybe into a bit too philosophic up there, but I like this idea because it's not about the resources you have or what you have achieved so far, which would be the ground the Earth Alliance works on. It's just like every species is equal in the sense of existing.
Hmm.
There's no one that's better or weaker than the other, which is a really, really strong sentiment to put out there. And even though we are laughing like, oh yeah, this league doesn't really work and stuff like that, this is really, really strong opinion and yeah, a kind of law to put out and say, hey, we may not be what everyone other is looking out for, but we're as a group, we're looking at each other, at least in this gathering, equally. There is no one stronger, no one better, no one weaker, no one worse. Where everyone is just the same, a living being with rights.
I think it's very interesting, and you are right. This is getting very philosophical, but I mean, it's a worthwhile thought to have. It depends really on what level you're making this consideration, right? If we're looking at each species is one unit, then it is obviously the fairest thing to say, well, we shouldn't judge these species on their scale or on their power or what they choose to invest in. Like, just because a species is completely pacifist, like the Abai, and doesn't really want to engage in any kind of conflict, shouldn't mean they don't get the same rights as anybody else. Makes complete sense. I guess where it becomes a little bit of a problem, and where a system like the Earth Alliance employs it in, is if you go down a notch and say, okay, but what does this mean for individual people, right? Like, now I can have a planet with 10 billion inhabitants and another species has 10 million inhabitants, and the individual vote of a member of a very small species is suddenly much more important than the individual vote of a very large species, just because one represents fewer people and has the same say as one that represents a boatload of people. And then, people start complaining about that. And I think this is a problem that, in real life we encounter a whole lot where, I mean, this is one of the things about the entire American electorate system, right? Like, if you say all the states have the same say, that becomes a problem because some states have millions and millions more people that then compared to a very rural state with much, much fewer. And then it becomes an issue. And this, like, perpetual box of entanglement. The one thing that the League of Non-Aligned Worlds kind of says, well, any system that you could try and implement to make this more fair will also lead to more corruption. So we just do away with it completely and just say, okay, the unit that we are focusing on is the individual species.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Though I would think, depending on what is decided, it's more or less important how many people are living on
Of course.
on a planet, because if it's if you have like let's say we have in the league there are 10 species, and 6 of these species are trading resource X, and the other 4 don't, because they don't need it. If you have a regulation now about how this trading is going on, the 4 that don't trade this can't really care about this, as long as they are not involved in any way. So you kind of get where I'm trying to pinpoint at.
I think so.
It's a bit hard to to say what I think.
I mean, maybe I can tell you where my mind goes, and maybe that is something that you can dock onto or not, or if it makes sense at all. I think for me, I would go back to what we were talking about with the map and say, taking one species as one unit kind of makes sense because we are on a scale of civilization where, for the people living inside of that species, the very large scale decisions don't necessarily have to matter all that much. Like if you're one species that controls one star system, which is sort of the lowest rung that we have in the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, you theoretically have all the energy and all the resources you're realistically going to need for the next million years to like cover all of your needs. Anything beyond that is always going to be more political maneuvering and luxury, essentially. And so I guess this is where I would get to this, to a similar point like you maybe, of saying, well, the representation of individual people on the level of the league decisions isn't exactly as equal, but they don't necessarily have to care about that.
Mm. I think what I'm was trying to make clear was the difference between fair and equal.
Oh, okay.
Because if you think about what you would consider fair, someone else would say, no, that's not fair because everyone has a different base.
Mm.
And especially in this league, where obviously it's stated so often, hi, we are, everyone is different. We do not have the same common ground. How would you be able to establish a fair quoting? You can't, because you do not have the same common ground. Therefore, you go for equality.
I guess that I can follow. That makes sense. I mean, we also just get to the point where, like you described, because every species is going to be so different and have different priorities, and these priorities are also going to change depending on what government they have currently in power and such. It's not like, we keep praising Babylon 5 for the fact that these are not monoliths necessarily, so they can have like completely different priorities over a span of 10 years. It wouldn't make sense for them to try and develop a system that is properly fair to everyone, because that's going to be hugely complicated and they do not have the capacities to doing that. So let's build a much simpler system based just on equality, which everybody's going to complain about, sure, but at least it's simple enough that everybody knows what they're complaining about and it's functional in doing what it's supposed to do.
And of course, it's better than one establishing what profits just himself and
Yeah. It's
yeah,
it's this
robs everyone else.
it's this epitome of a compromise. Nobody is happy, but that's still better than one being extremely happy and everybody else being screwed over. Well, one of the final quotes, which I guess embodies all of this a little bit, is at its worst, it's a barely functional form of oversight government charged with the unenviable task of keeping together the most uncooperative, self-interested, and isolationist powers in the galaxy. Which I guess, yeah, this points exactly to the point to what you were mentioning. It always keeps coming back to this point that they're so different from one another and so difficult to get to work together in any capacity that you don't really get the luxury of trying to develop a very complex system with them.
Yeah, with that, we hope you enjoyed our new installment on this channel. Get a few new ideas, or maybe we just deconstructed everything you thought and believed in. Feel free to let us know about that. Where can people find us?
Basically on all the usual social media platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter, /X, and of course on Spotify and all the different places you can get your podcasts.
But here on YouTube, we are what again?
Probably the happiest.
Because you can see us. And with this, we hope to see you next time.